And he put his hand on my shoulder and he very gently but very sternly said, "Shy people get nothing, and that's what they deserve." When I think about sports graphics, a team wins and suddenly they're in the series. You didn't know which team it was going to be until they won, right? Now you've got like a couple of days to get this thing going. This is where speed becomes the thing that brings people over. I respect anybody who's had years of time in a thing. Me personally, I always want to try using the next tool that comes out and try to make sense out of it and see how it fits in and not get sort of stuck in one place.
Aharon, I have a question for you. I went on your Instagram and you have a bunch of cool artwork that you've made. You've got beautiful photos of your family, and you had this quote that I think is from you. I'm going to read it to you. So the quote is, "Shyness is the fear of rejection. It has no place in art." Yeah. And I thought, that must mean something. What does that mean?
Well, it was a piece of advice I got from a professor in college. And he said to me, he asked me when I was working on some scripts, he says, "Has anyone looked at this stuff?" And I said, "No, because if I send it to them and they don't like it, I'm going to be crushed." And he put his hand on my shoulder and he very gently but very sternly said, "Shy people get nothing, and that's what they deserve." And I don't think shy people deserve nothing, but in an industry of art where you have to put yourself out there, yeah, you have to in some way make noise and also be willing to accept rejection for that noise that you make.
Have you always been like that? Because, you're a New Yorker, you live in Manhattan, and you definitely are not afraid to disagree with people. And, that's like my mom was a New Yorker also. So she, I kind of get that personality. Have you always been that way, or did you have to kind of cultivate that?
I had to cultivate it, and it's funny because I said the same quote that you just gave. I was talking to John Knoll at Industrial Light and Magic, and he's the guy who created Photoshop with his brother, and also he's the chief creative officer there. And we were talking about it because he's such an introvert and such a quiet guy. And we got into this discussion about shyness versus introversion. And, he said that when you're shy and you don't give people feedback, the harsh feedback that they need, and you don't have to be a jerk while you're giving it, but if you don't give it to them, they don't do their best work. And then you're not satisfied with that work either. And nobody's happy. Right. So there's a big difference between introversion and shyness, which is that shy people, like I say, have a fear of rejection, whereas introverts just don't speak unless they've got something to say, But if you're introverted and you're still a good leader and you're still a good, mentor, you still give that feedback when people need to hear it.
Yeah, I like that. I've heard it also put this way where you've got, shy and outgoing, which is kind of what we're talking about. And then you've got introvert and extrovert. The difference being an introvert sort of has to use up energy to interact with people. Yeah. Whereas an extrovert gets energy from interacting with people. So I consider myself, for example, an outgoing introvert. What would you consider yourself?
I would say the same. I'm usually, it's funny because if I'm at a conference, I would much rather be the guy on stage than the guy in the crowd having to deal with everybody, right? Like, it's just easier. Like, I don't have to have a conversation. And like, it's not that I don't like talking to people. It's like, I do one-on-one, maybe a couple, but you put me in a crowd and I'm like, I'm going to be in a corner somewhere,
Yeah. Well, so I've learned a trick and I actually think I learned this at NAB from somebody. And it's been very helpful for me, and it probably for someone in your position too, because we both get recognized when we go to conferences. It's called the Irish goodbye. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah.
Yeah. For anyone listening who hasn't heard of it, you want to leave, but you're not good at saying goodbye. And so you just say like, "I'm going to the bathroom, I'll be right back," and then you just leave.
Right. I mean, the problem is I've got a long history of the Jewish goodbye, which is you show up and you have to start saying goodbye right away because it's going to take several hours to make that exit,
Yeah,
so,
that's true. We are yappers. We really are. So you've had like a long and illustrious career in this industry. You've worked with a lot of cool companies. You've done a lot of cool things. But I also know you worked on Sesame Street at some point. And I actually don't know if I've ever heard that story. We've known each other a long time, and I don't actually know the Sesame Street story. So maybe you can tell us that.
It's crazy. Like, this is something that my older sister, she really tried to talk to me about networking and how important it was. And, I see this when people ask me, "Hey, can I have your kids? Can I have my kids talk to you?" I'm like, "Sure," and then I never hear from them. She drilled into me that like trying to connect with people, even if it's not to get a job or just to know people, right? That was really important. And at a time where I had graduated from college and I could not figure out what my next step was going to be, I wanted to talk to somebody about children's television. I loved Sesame Street, and I knew somebody who worked at Sesame Street, and even though that person couldn't give me a job and it was not in an area that I was meant to be in, it was like research, psychological research that they do there. He said, "Hey, I know a producer here. She'd be happy to talk to you." And I ended up getting on the phone with this producer, and I said, "Look, I just want 10 minutes of time. I have a couple of questions for you." And she was really great. And when my 10 minutes were up, I said, you know what, my 10 minutes are up. We should stop now. Your time's too valuable. And she said, you know what, you're the first person I've ever spoken to about this kind of stuff who like recognized the time and said that, you know, that they should stop. So you can call me any other time you want. Just let me know you want to talk and I'll talk. And so about 6 months later, as I was trying to find my next thing, I just said, what the heck, let me just reach out. And it turned out they had an intern that had just quit for family reasons, I think. And what happened is that they can't just take on another college student because it's for credits and it was like already half of the semester gone. So they said, hey, you want that internship? We can't pay you, but it's, you know, it's what we do here. So I hopped on, and that was my entrance into Sesame Street. And then from there, you know, like I managed to get work within the company. I wasn't an animator at the time, but I was supporting artists. So I got a hold of like After Effects and 3D Studio Max, and I started to learn the tools. And by the time my time there was over, I was doing a little bit of animation for the show.
Now, when you say you got a hold of these tools, did you get a hold of them the same way I probably did? You know, you torrent. I mean, I don't think torrenting was a thing, but you found them. You know.
No, let's be clear. There was the
they
tools
fell
that
off
I worked
a truck.
at. There was the tools that I used at the company that they gave me, right? Because they wanted me to support the artists there, so I had to learn After Effects, and I was just kind of figuring it out. But then there was just stuff I wanted to learn on the side, which, you know, I went to SVA. Outside of SVA, there was a guy in a trench coat. He's like, psst, buddy, want some software here? You know, and right. But you know, allegedly. So
yeah, exactly. It's the statute of limitations is already run out, so
right.
I think we're fine.
Yeah. Plus, you know what? Steve Kaliski, who was the head of After Effects at the time, we were at dinner. It was me and Andrew Kramer and a couple other people, and he was like, "So, that's a question for you guys. How many of you guys stole After Effects when you first started?" And we're all like, "Yeah, but you can't understand. Back then, there were no trials. There was no like trials or internet downloads or anything like that. Like you had to buy the software to use it." So we all kind of he raised our hand and he said. He's like, well, good, because now you're paying us back by doing all this, these tutorials and all this training. So I think it's a fair trade. We'll just call it even, right?
Yeah,
you know.
It's pretty amazing to me how that whole model has shifted, you know, and now basically every software has a free trial or a free version. I mean, that was kind of unheard of, you know, back in those days. And frankly, It would have been almost impossible to pull off without the internet, you know? Yeah,
because let's age ourselves here, but the internet was not quite a thing that it is today, right? Like the high-speed internet was like, that was like a privilege that if you worked in like at MTV, you could maybe access that. But like at home, it was that, you know, the sounds that you get from the dial-up.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. I mean, okay, so whoever's editing this, put in the sound of a modem connecting right now, just so everyone who's like not, you know, at least 30 can hear what that sounds like. That's awesome. So at Sesame Street, what were you actually doing there? What was your job?
So I started off like as an intern, and that's you just do whatever they tell you to do. And sometimes I got to be on set, which was really, really cool. And sometimes it was really just a lot of paperwork, you know. But when I started working as a PA, you know, I worked on a show. I got to look at scripts ahead of time and proof them. And so I really started to like do things that I was like seeing what the professionals are doing when they're putting a show into production. And I got my hands on that stuff as a PA. Then I became a technical manager for the interactive group. At that time, they were making video games, but the games were done by also like animators and stuff. So I was working with them, and like I just started making animation for the show because there was spillover. There wasn't enough of a budget necessarily to hire people outside. So like, hey, the interactive team's available. Let's give them some work. So I was doing stuff, and in fact, like the opening to one segment called Journey to Ernie, which aired for like 10 years. I did the opening for that, and you know, I tried showing my kids, and they're like, I was like, I made this. And they're like, where are you? I'm like, I'm not on the screen. They're like, yeah, but Big Bird's there. And I'm like, I give up. I can't impress them. You know, not even.
Yeah. Now it's all Mr. Beast, and they don't care about Big Bird anymore. Yeah. You know, it was a different time.
Dude, I got to say, you come home and you see your kids watching something. You're like, what are you watching? They're like, oh, I'm watching how to make pancake art. And I'm like, I had to come home and watch He-Man or Thundercats, which I love, by the way. But like, that's what you was on. You didn't have a choice, right?
Yeah, so, there was four things.
Yeah. Four things.
Yeah, it was like good times or something else. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like the whole concept, and this is where, you know, it gets really interesting for now, where like there's so many forms of entertainment and so much opportunity to create, where back then it was like just consume whatever was, and there was no opportunities for artists to like make their own stuff, and we're in a whole other era of creativity.
Yeah. So what did you, I mean, Sesame Street, you know, it's funny. So my kids and your kids now are a little bit older. My youngest is 9. Your youngest is older than that. And so they don't watch Sesame Street. I'm not even sure how kind of culturally relevant Sesame Street still is. I assume it is. But, you know, for people our age and probably even younger, I mean, that was such a, you know, like a pillar of television, you must have learned some interesting things about, storytelling or how to produce things at scale. Like, what are some of the lessons you learned there?
Well, I wanted to share just two experiences that I had that were mind blowing for me. And then we could talk more about like the lessons I learned. But this, for somebody who grew up on this stuff, I once had to go to the Henson workshop to bring a Muppet that had torn some of the skin. It's like surgery for the Muppet. And I got in, and it was like I went to Disneyland there. You walk in, the doors open, I come, like they are in this, the Muppet place, the place where they work on the Muppets was in this hole in the wall. They deliberately had this really cruddy looking building that had no marketing. They had a whole other like office for like the professional offices of Henson. But this was like, they did not want people showing up to this place, right? So I get in there and I come up and there's like a bunch of dogs running around inside this space, right? And there's Muppets everywhere. And then I'm like, hey, is anyone here? And literally this bird puppet comes above. Someone was, I guess, working on it. He's like, yo, hello. Like this. Like, it was like, hello. I was like,
oh my
what?
God.
Right. So that was amazing. And also when I walked onto the set of Sesame Street, I looked up and I saw Snuffleupagus hanging from the rafters. It was a little frightening because like that was like he's been stuffed and hung, but
right.
But yeah,
he's mounted.
But it's funny is what I learned. I learned a couple of things on that show, working on that show, which is I'm trying to think this through. Is that everybody who was there for the right reason. I don't think I came across a single person who was like, oh, it's for the money or whatever. They were doing it. They were involved in this because they loved it. And that idea of loving what you do and being there for the right reason, like it translates, like people look at you and they can see if you're excited to work with them and work on a project, right? I think that if you're going to ask me something like what is the lesson that I've learned over my career to help somebody who is starting out, I mean, I would say that being excited to be there and being fully present is everything. Like talent is great and it gets you to a certain point, but being present, being, working hard, coming and being excited about the work and just having a good attitude is like so much bigger. And that's at Sesame Street, what I saw, like everybody was like that. It was pretty amazing. And it's rare to find that in a workplace where everybody is 100% on board with what you're doing and they just want to produce good work and they want the world to be a better place.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Well, that's interesting. I'm curious if some of that will come back around when we talk about some of your more recent gigs that you've had since then.
Yeah.
So I think I probably heard your name or read it somewhere. I mean, this probably would have been around, 2002 or something like that, like long time ago for our viewers. And I assume it was on Creative Cow because that was sort of the first website that I started going to when I started using After Effects. And I was mostly a video editor back then, and I was trying to figure out how to do more things in After Effects. And there you are. And somehow you had even figured out how to record videos and put them on the internet, which sounds trivial now, but it wasn't back then. Like you had to use all these crazy things, Sorensen squeeze, and make little, Flash video files and stuff.
It's pretty nuts. It was like the Wild West, I think about that YouTube didn't exist then. And I was thinking of this movie called, there was a Firefly movie from the show Firefly, which was Serenity, right?
Great movie, yeah.
And I love that movie, but I realized something is that also came out before YouTube. And if YouTube existed, the premise of that movie would have been different. They have to find a way to distribute this video across the galaxy. And there's the concept of a shared website where people share video like regularly didn't exist. And so like, they're like, how do we get this video out there? I'm like, if like now it's like, oh, just upload it to YouTube. That'll get shared or to social media. That'll get out there. But that didn't exist then. Right. So trying to get a video seen was really hard. I remember I put up a video on Creative Cow. I asked them if they wanted a tutorial, and I should be clear. Like my tutorials were not like me, some genius who knew so much, who was going and like sharing his knowledge with the world. I was going into work at Nickelodeon, learning something from the people around me and being like, wow, this is really cool. I should share this with other people. People should know how to do this. And I'd go home and record it. And then I would make a tutorial each week about something I learned that week messing around at Nickelodeon, right? So I upload that. And then they asked me at Creative Cow, they were like, hey, do you want to make a podcast? And I'm like, podcasts are a fad. That's not a thing that's going to last, right? So, but I was like, sure, why not? Let's do it. And we had like 80,000 people a week downloading these tutorials. And that was crazy. Like, cause it wasn't easy to watch this stuff and it wasn't easy to download, but people really wanted to learn it. And I realized that, every tutorial I'd ever seen, the only kinds that were ever on video were like Brian Maffett on VHS, right? That was how a lot of us
legend,
right? How we got into After Effects. And And there was no easy way to do that. All the other ones that were online were like written by like engineers and were very technical, but not artistic. And so I just wanted to share the cool stuff that I was learning from other artists with people. And it just became a thing. And it's probably what kind of kicked off my career, that sort of phase of my career where I went from being like an animator to somebody who was sharing knowledge and teaching. And it showed me how much I enjoyed the idea of spreading the wealth a little bit there.
Yeah, and I want to dig into that a little bit because you kind of hinted on it, but back in those days, just technologically, it was very difficult to distribute information, right? And so the way you would learn software like After Effects was so different than it is now. And I mean, I think, if you're sort of like, okay, well, there are pros and cons to everything. There's trade-offs to everything. I think it's overwhelmingly positive to have YouTube and all of these things, right? But, back then that may not have been obvious. Did you ever run into like backlash or like as this transition started to happen, what was that like kind of being in the middle of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was really weird. I thought that most people would be happy to have extra knowledge on the internet, right? What the internet was. And there was like a bunch of people who had they'd gone to art school, they learned this stuff, they had very solid careers, who started sending me like hate mail saying like, I went to school and you're sharing the stuff that I had to pay for an education in this. And they got mad at me for sort of sharing this stuff around. I was really surprised by it. But it's funny, I've learned over the years that the whole democratization process like causes that effect. At Red Giant, we made Magic Bullet, and then all the colorists got angry and said that's not how you do color. It's color theory and all this stuff, and they're totally right, except for the fact that it works. And then it was like when we dropped Super Comp, that was from VFX Suite. A lot of compositors gave the same like, you're showing people how to do something without them understanding the fundamentals of compositing and all that. And I'm like, when I hear that now, I'm like, I must be onto something right? We must be doing it right if we're making the highest level of those artists feel a little threatened. And I don't want that for artists. I don't want artists to feel threatened. But if the entirety of your ability is technique and not artistic ability, then you will be replaced by younger people who have newer tools. That's just how it's going to be. Right.
Do you think, and I think we'll probably come back to this later on when we talk about AI, but do you think that, here's kind of my theory, is that part of that reaction comes from, everybody has an ego, right? And people's egos are kind of tied to different facets of who they are. And so if your ego is tied to like your ideas and like the cool things that you're able to create, then it maybe doesn't matter if someone else can also create that. But if your ego is tied to you knowing how to do those things and that they're hard and not everyone can do it, and all of a sudden that changes, then that is kind of like an attack. Does that ring true to you, or do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing, like, when I was using Maya and I went to Maya forums and people were posting really cool stuff, and you'd ask them how they did it, they would suddenly clam up. Like, they didn't want to share their techniques. And I always found that was like a good indicator that person, is feeling threatened by the idea that someone else should do it. But I love, what we've got today, which is like, if somebody puts something up that's cool and you ask them how they did it, they're like, you know what, I can't keep answering Twitter. Let me just record a video showing you how I did the thing. And I love that. I love that that's the culture that we have when it comes to the work that we do.
Yeah, and I think it's obvious to everyone who does this professionally that just knowing how something was done doesn't mean you can also do it. We have a workshop from Ordinary Folk that did our big manifesto video where they walk through the entire thing. That doesn't mean by watching that you can now immediately go do that, right? But now it's not a secret how they did it anymore. To me, it's just like unequivocally a good thing. And I remember you telling me a while ago that people were writing into you in those days, kind of attacking you. And I thought that was kind of odd and weird. But now that I think about it, I mean, when I was coming up, I was always working alongside flame artists at certain studios. And a lot of them were very nice, but what they had to go through, like the older flame artists, what they had to do to get that knowledge and get in that chair where they could bill $1,500 a day, like they didn't want to give that up so easy and just let this young kid sit down next to him and watch.
Yeah.
So I kind of get it.
That's why I think the colorists, the same reaction to Magic Bullet is that they're sitting down at these big Starship Enterprise control panels, right, in this room with these nice chairs and all of that, and there's a feeling of a threat. But the truth is, the studios are going to want to still sit in one of those rooms with somebody. But on the other hand, the guy making a commercial that he's got to turn around in 2 days, he needs color correction tools as well. And so, like, there's a different market for it, and it's not a threat if you actually have talent and you understand the medium that you're working in. It's just more of it's more of a threat if you're really kind of just winging it and you know that you're sort of just pretending to be like an expert in this stuff and all that. Like that's like, and I think some of that whole field, any of the higher end field, is a lot of like bluster, and we got a fridge full of every kind of soda you could want. Come in and 5 different waters and sit down in our nice room. And like, this is what you're paying for, because not only do you get good sodas, but you get like the highest level of artist, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I used to laugh. I mean, I remember in Boston when I was looking for internships right out of school and stuff, all of the post houses at the time, and this would have been like 2002, 2003, if you went on their websites, if they even had a website, but if you went on their websites, it wasn't showing like the great work they did and talking about their ethos and what they brought to the table. It was talking about the Henry they just bought, or the really expensive calibrated monitors they had in their coloring suite, or the fact they just upgraded their flames and they were networked. And it was all about the hardware and the software they owned, and not so much about the artists that were there. And that changed, I think, pretty quickly. It felt like 10 years later, everything was different.
Well, I mean, you know, I think about it, because like how an Avid system used to be like a computer. Like it wasn't just the software; it was like the system. So like having the money to pay for that ridiculous thing, or even saying like we just got a whole bunch of new licenses of Maya when they cost $25,000 a pop, right? I mean, it's bonkers, right?
Is that what they used to cost? Really?
Yeah,
$25,000.
$25,000. When I first started, it was a crazy amount of money. And like the idea that you have that just shows people that you've made it. You know, we've already arrived, so you want to come to work with us.
It's almost a form of credentialism. It's kind of weird, you know? That's really interesting. So one last question on the olden days. I know that you and a guy by the name of Andrew Kramer, I think is his name, were kind of coming up at the same time and making tutorials. And, you know, you were two of the earliest guys that I saw teaching After Effects on the internet. Did you guys ever cross paths? Yeah, I mean, we did. It's funny. I just say like, that Andrew and I were so like we were doing stuff at the same time so much that somebody came up to me on the street like maybe a couple of years ago, and they're like, "Hey, you're the After Effects guy." I'm like, "Here it comes!" They're like, "You're Andrew Kramer." I'm like, "So close, so close." but yeah, you know, Andrew, what happened was I just started doing tutorials at Creative Cow, and I went to SIGGRAPH. And which is, by the way, where I met Paul Babb at that SIGGRAPH. We'll talk about Paul a little bit too. Oh, wow.
You know, but I was at SIGGRAPH and I came across this tutorial that was just out there. It was put out like the day before, and it was from this guy named Andrew Kramer. It was the first tutorial I think he put online, and he had his website, which was called Final Image, and it had his phone number. So I was like, I'm at SIGGRAPH. I'm just going to call Andrew and just tell him I really love the tutorial and I'd love to work with him. So I pick up the phone and I get his brother Matt and I said, "Hey, I love your tutorial. I think you want my brother." So he puts me on with Andrew, and we talked for a couple of minutes, and I was like, "Hey man, I'm at SIGGRAPH. You coming to SIGGRAPH?" And he's like, "What's SIGGRAPH?" Because this is the beginning of like you had also just like started out. You know, we were figuring it all out, and I mean, obviously he knows what SIGGRAPH is now. I mean, the guy is like he's a great, like, if you ever have a chance to watch him present at any of these conferences, it's a ton of fun.
He's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. He's so much fun, and you know, so Andrew, you know, we became really good friends. He used to crash at my place, you know, in New York, like this little small place that we had when we started out. And like, he was a great guy. He came to After Effects New York, which is this group that we started here in New York, me and a guy named Jim Godoldik, and Andrew came out, and like, you know, he would show up and like 400 people would show up. It was awesome. Like, he's a great draw and a really impactful person in our industry. But I would say that for me, it was like having a chance to work with him. I produced his first training DVD. And like DVD, by the way, again, that's what we did back in the day, right? Training DVDs. Yeah. And he's a pleasure to work with, like always, like full of energy. And, you know, talk about that, loving what you do. I've never seen somebody who loves what he does as much as him. And that's saying a lot, because we all love the work we do, but he is like he lives life and loves it so much. Yeah.
Well, and, you know, I've gotten to spend some time with him and talk with him. And I mean, and I think you and him remind me of each other a lot, because you're both like, you're all about like how the thing was done, and not just on like a surface level. It's like, you want to know like literally like what shader that was. I mean, you know, and you can both really talk the talk. So it makes sense that you guys kind of came up together and are buddies.
Yeah. And we actually share a lot of a similar philosophy about marketing too, about how important like telling the story of a product that you make is. Like, we very much recognize that making the product isn't enough, but that story and like what matters about it is important. And I'm happy to talk about marketing, you know, up the wazoo, which is a weird thing considering I'm an animator and visual effects artist, but I've kind of fallen into marketing, you know, through the years as I've worked with all this software.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is about how you ended up at Red Giant Software, which is, I think, where probably your public persona kind of, started to grow and you became more well-known because not only were you in charge of the marketing at Red Giant, but you, in a sense, or at least for a little while, became kind of the face of it. And that's kind of an interesting model that now I think everyone's seen this model all over the place. I mean, School Motion was sort of built on this model, Grayscale Gorilla, obviously Video Copilot. Lots of companies are built on, there's sort of this company, but there's this public face that people can kind of latch onto. So maybe you can talk about how you ended up in that position at a company like Red Giant.
So I was working as an animator. I had my own company and I was doing a lot of spillover work from Viacom, whether it was Nickelodeon, TV Land. I was super busy, and I started looking at the time and it was like 100 hours a week of work. It wasn't hard for me because I just loved it. And we had the freedom, my wife and I, just to kind of do the thing. Then my daughter was born and I was like, I really love this work, but I don't want to work 100 hours a week. And I was like, what else do I really love about this industry? Because I don't want to leave this industry. And I realized that the software side of it was like, I just loved being in the software and figuring out how to do things. I'd already made a bunch of tutorials and I was like, a lot of it was like you say, figuring out like how these things work and how to make things. So I reached out to two companies. One was Maxon and one was Red Giant. I was using both their tools. And, the first thing that Red Giant said to me on the phone was, yeah, we're not going to hire you. But then I was like, yeah, no, I think we might make that work. And I kind of pitched them on like what I wanted to do for the company. I said, you guys are a great company. You have a lot of, cool products, but you're not telling your story. As far as everyone's concerned, you're just the man. Right? You're like, you're a company. It was like, you need to reach out to people. The community is what really helps propel the software industry right now. And you need to be a part of that community, not just selling to it, but really be a part of it. And so they gave me a 6-month contract to sort of become like a head of communities. Actually, no, I wanted to be the head of communities. They said, we don't have any infrastructure for any kind of community. So you'll be the head of marketing. I failed upwardly after that 6 months into head of communities because I wasn't great at marketing, and marketing back then was a lot of like banners. You make banners or something. It isn't like it was today. Content marketing. A lot of marketing is content today, but it wasn't back then. Right. So it was it was like not the best match for me, but we both saw the potential of my time there. And so they moved me into communities because during that time, while I was failing at marketing, I was also building a whole infrastructure for communities. And so I did that and made that transition. And then from there, I was working with a guy named Dan Eberts, right? A lot of people know him from Creative Cow, but also he makes a lot of the monkey tools, I think, that they sell at AE Scripts. He's one of the two people. And he's this really interesting coder guy who has the answer to any kind of weird After Effects question you've ever had, right? If you've got a weird, like, how do I make this thing go? He's, oh yeah, here's this little thing of code. It's like 15 lines of code I just made 5 minutes ago just for you, right? And he posted it on. So we started working together and we started making plugins together. And so, that knowledge and working with him and then selling that through Red Giant, like it just kind of all made sense. So I went from being this software user to someone who was making the tools, part of at least some of the tools that people were using, but also helping to explain them to people. And, you talk about how like sites like Grayscale Gorilla or Video Copilot have that model of like having a persona. I didn't want it to be just me. So as soon as it was possible, I started bringing on other artists to work with me and to also help be the face of the company. And one person who was hard to get to be the face of the company was Stu Maschwitz, by the way, who is like, Stu is like, he's the guy behind Magic Bullet and so many other tools in the VFX suite, but he was never comfortable doing that. And I think the day he realized that he was like a software designer in addition to being a director, as opposed to being a director who sometimes dabbles in software design, he just embraced it. And he gets in front of the microphone and records stuff. But at the time, it was like just me, and then I got a couple of people here and there. Aaron Stern popped in occasionally. But then we got to like Seth Worley and Hashi, and those are guys that like really helped propel that company and just set it like to a next sort of phase of Red Giant into being something much bigger than it was. Yeah,
well, that's awesome. Okay, so I mean, the way you got the gig, you asked for it. It's not like they recruited you or you saw a classified ad and then they said no and you were persistent. And so you kind of have this history of like shooting your shot and just like kind of going for it. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was because while you were there, you sort of developed this marketing strategy with I know other people, which I thought was brilliant, which was you're sort of using the tools over there in service of making really cool short films. So you're sort of demoing. I honestly thought it was brilliant. You're demoing what they can do. And then on top of that, now you get these things that you own and you can do making ofs and there's content that splits off of that. But some of those films had, big name actors in it. You had Patton Oswalt do a VO for one. You had David Hewlett, who has been in a million things, but he, I guess, was at the time mostly known for being in Star Trek: The Next Generation.
No, Stargate Atlantis.
Or Stargate, yeah, that's what it was, Stargate. And so how did you end up, I mean, because I don't know, like I just imagine myself in that situation. I'd be like, all right, well, what's like the lowest cost version of this I could do? And what's the sure thing I can pull off? How did you end up that way?
Red Giant was a small company when I got on board. I think I was employee number 7 at the company, right? When I left, well, before Maxon acquired it, we were like maybe 45 people. But when we started, it was a small company, and we said, let's all get together. We got together in Toronto because one of the owners of the company was traveling through there, and we got together and we're like, okay, what can we do to help get the company some attention? And there may have been a lot of drinking involved. You're in Toronto,
Fair.
and that's just what you do.
Yeah.
But I was like, I've seen these great videos from guys like Film Riot and Freddie Wong, who these great the people who were really like early on the train of like teaching people how to do cool film and stuff like that on YouTube. I was like, we should be doing that. Like, we make great tools, and we've got people like Stu, and like, how is it that we're not telling people like that, like telling our story? How are we not telling people that like this is what you should do, and we do it too because we love it, right? So they were like, okay, what do you need? I said, I need $25,000. They said, you got 10. And then I was like, okay. And I found this guy who was making videos for a, not church, but like a religious organization called Lifeway. His name was Seth Worley. And I found, I just found some stuff he had done. And in the behind the scenes, he talked about how he had done the whole series that he had done for them for like, I don't know, for chump change. And I was like, that's the guy I want to work with. Like, he's able to really make the dollar work, So I reached out to him, and we made this first short film called Plot Device. And while we were working on it, I was like, I think this is really special. I don't know. Maybe I'm just because, you get involved in a project and you're like, this is awesome, right? Or if you're more like me, it's usually this is terrible, right? But you're working on something. But something just kept telling me that this was different and it was special. And, I kept saying it to Seth, and he's like, yeah, Aaron's just, blowing smoke up my butt because he's trying to keep me happy while I'm working on this for a lot less money than I would maybe want to do it for, right? But we did it, and the day it came out, Seth was supposed to leave on vacation, and J.J. Abrams called him on the phone to tell him how awesome it was and that he wanted to work with Seth, right? I mean, like, it was like, that was
wow.
Like, right. So like that actually turned into work for Seth, but like that was such a great moment for Red Giant, even if like it wasn't J.J. Abrams called Red Giant, but we suddenly realized we just done something super cool. Got, 1 million views, again, and that was like, nobody had done anything like this. And in fact, I was hoping other people would start to, but it never really materialized. Outside of Red Giant, I didn't see any other companies trying to do this kind of thing. And we were like, okay, well, this worked really well. Let's make more. And we just started making more of these films, and they would grow, and more people would see them. And then, one day we had this idea for 2 films, one of which we said, like, let's save the money for that. Let's save the money for that other big one. And let's just do like a small one. And that small one, when the script got to Patton Oswalt, and that was only because, we had a friend who knew a friend. And also the story of that one, Old New, was about a guy who sort of that gets off the internet and stops using technology. And I knew that would resonate with Patton Oswalt because he had just sort of gone through like a 3-month cleanse of the internet after a rough time on Twitter. Mm-hmm. So we got the script to him. Money on was that little short was the one that Patton Oswalt jumped into, which was like such a great experience because like I knew that that's the guy I wanted to do it. We had other people that we were talking to, but in my heart of hearts I was like, I want that Patton Oswalt is the voice for this thing. And when he said yes, I'm not gonna lie, I cried a little bit. I totally
I would
did.
too.
It was like it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, dude, that's amazing. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of, I've heard a similar story from a lot of artists and studios where they sort of self-fund some personal project. I mean, in this case, $10,000 for a company like Red Giant, that is a tiny amount of money to invest in something like this, right? So I think it's fair to say that on the production of this, the company probably lost money, but long-term, what it opened up and the opportunities and eventually like the eyeballs and the marketing, you probably can't even quantify.
Yeah, we had real movie producers and actors who wanted to like buy, like Plot device was like Adam Sandler wanted to buy plot device and use it. And you could totally see how he would have made that into an Adam Sandler film, right?
Yeah.
And then we had other films again that was just different directors or different people. They were interested in it because it was a fun story that they thought, could that be adapted into a full screen, full feature? And in fairness, Seth, the last film he did that we did together, that is actually becoming a feature film. Like he directed it himself. It's got Tony Hale in it. Like I'm really proud of like the fact that he made that work. Like it took a long time.
Yeah. And
that's something people should know is that like when somebody has success, there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. Seth worked for years to get to that point. And, even with all the promises and all the meetings in Hollywood and all of that, like you learn pretty quickly that that's all bluster. It's all like, yeah, it sounds good until someone has to take action. But he actually pushed really hard to get that done. And he did it through the friendships he made while he was in LA. And, he pushed really hard to make it happen. So it's pretty awesome. That stuff does not happen on its own.
Yeah. All right. So you're making me think of something I wanted to bring up, which is, and we talked about it a little bit, this idea that you've got, sort of the top of the mountain that most artists get into this industry to aim for, right? And so now Seth is getting to actually operate in that world. Red Giant starts with this little film that they spend $10,000 on, and then that eventually turns into Seth Worley directing a movie with Hollywood actors in it, and then on top of that, you're making, or at the time, Red Giant was making tools for artists. But like if let's use Magic Bullet, right? It's like a amazing color correction tool. Well, if you're aiming at Hollywood, they don't need that. They can afford the $1,000 an hour or more colorist, at Company 3 in New York or whatever. So you're making these tools for everybody else, which is like 99% of the people creating, right? But how do you sort of balance that, right? Because I think there's like a little bit, and we've been guilty of this too at School of Motion, there can be a little bit of elitism. Like we always talk about this artist, this studio, and we're all aiming at them and interviewing them and trying to make work like that, but really forgetting that 99 out of 100 things don't look like that and are done for banks or, motorcycle conventions or, mouthwash, something
right.
like that.
I think, it helps to keep in mind that Magic Bullet, for example, was created by Stu Maschwitz, who wrote the DV Rebels Guide, which is about like making films on a low budget, right? But he created Magic Bullet while he was working as a visual effects supervisor on Sin City. He was on the set, like making the tools because he was like, can I translate this into something that's a little more, affordable and also like that's easier to use than the current tools that are there, which is what he's always trying to do. And so like it was born out of a Hollywood movie, but at the same time, he was making that deliberately for the purposes of letting somebody who would buy the DV Rebels Guide, right, to make a film on the cheap with guerrilla filmmaking so that they could have their film look awesome. So the philosophy was already there with Red Giant, right? Like the idea of producing something that like is aspirational, but at the same time, very, very connectable to something that you're working on every day and not to some crazy Hollywood movie that costs, like $500 million, right? Although at the time, I think like 100 million was pretty big back at that time. But it was like, that's the thing is that like these tools were suddenly able to make it so that people who maybe wouldn't have had access to stuff like that are suddenly able to do that. And so, sure, not everything that people make is going to be the greatest thing ever. But I think about this is that, you mentioned like whether it's a toothpaste commercial, whatever, the fact is most of the people are doing that work. It's like there's a pyramid, right? It's like this pyramid of what people are doing. And at the top, you've got this high-end studios like Buck and other amazing companies. But most people are making commercials for, like I remember I did Pepto-Bismol, right? Where we did one for America and one for, I think it was, one was in Spanish. I don't remember exactly where we were aiming that one for, but there was a guy in the US, one of the guys eating hot dogs and like they show the Pepto, I animate the Pepto going down and dissolving the hot dog. And in the Spanish one, it was like a poblano pepper, and the guy's like, "Oh," like he's like, it was great. It was like one of my favorite. I just love that because like but we took it really seriously when we were working on it. It was like super serious, like it was the work we were doing, and I felt that it was as important as I'm sure somebody who's working on a Hollywood film. Like it's important that the thing I'm doing looks as good to me as I can make it, and maybe it's not going to be the best piece of art, but it's absolutely important. And if you recognize that the stuff you're making and the stuff that you're like, whether or not we're teaching at School of Motion, right? Like we're aiming to people who are going to think that whatever they're doing and feel that whatever they're doing is important. And it is. So it doesn't matter if they're making something that's like the top of our field or sports motion graphics, which the aesthetic hasn't changed in like 15 years, neons and reflective metal. It's very similar. and it's, you end up with an interesting crowd because like you get a certain level of animator that just sits there. When they get better or they get better at managing people, they move into management. But there's like a certain age range of people that stay within like the sports graphics. I find, for example, it's like there's like a mid-level of skill, and there are of course always people who are very skilled there too, but they become art directors a lot of the time or the leaders of these people. But it's a place where, like I say, the aesthetic hasn't changed. And so it's not the top tier. You're not looking at top tier art, but you're looking at stuff that's, visually pleasing. It's just not, it's not cutting edge, right? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
It's very polished craft though.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah. It's just, there's a look to it though. And you're never going to be like, we need more of in sports, we need more wooden spheres that roll around on like, with good lighting. That's not the thing. It's like there's or whatever it is, like I'm trying to think of like other things that we see, like subsurface scattering. We need more plastic subsurface scattering balls. Like that's not it. It's always going to look a certain way. And if you feel if you look down on that and you say those people are, they're not making the coolest stuff, then you're never going to be able to connect with them. The fact is that they are making cool stuff. You just have to recognize that it's just a different kind of cool stuff.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at here is I think there's probably some lessons that, even like freelance artists who are just doing client work that they can take from the things that you've learned doing marketing for big companies. And, you've worked for a bunch of different companies and, you've taught me a lot, even just with the short time you've been with us, this idea that like, you have to meet your client or your customer or your student where they are sometimes. Right. And so if Red Giant had been marketing as if all of their tools were for Hollywood, like video editors and visual effects artists, and that was it, it might have been hard for someone who was, in Boston freelancing, working with ad agencies, doing, I remember literally like having to pixelate out boobies in commercials for like a year. But I still was trying to get better. And if I had been marketed to as though, well, this isn't for you, Joey. This is only for the top. It's not going to work, right? It's not going to resonate. And I'm wondering, I don't know, if you had to freelance again, how would you market yourself, sort of keeping that lesson in mind that you want to do the top work, but also you're going to be working with clients that aren't always bringing that?
I don't know that I want to do that. I'm not a great artist. Like I would say that I'm not a great artist. I don't know that I want to do that top level work. I don't think I could. I don't think I have that artistic eye to create that stuff. But I do have what I think is fair to say is like a really strong desire to produce good work, and also to be dedicated to it, and to always try to find solutions. And that's where I feel like that mid range. That's where it shines, right? Where there's there's people in that mid range who are. They may not be the top artist, but they have talent, but they're so excited by it. And they don't care that they're doing like a toothpaste commercial or whatever. They want their stuff to look the best. And that's where I always found that I thrived, and just because the mindset there is no ego, just doing awesome stuff. And that for me, that's what I love. I'm sitting here trying out a whole bunch of new software. I'm constantly starting from the bottom. I'm always trying to learn new things. And I'm constantly starting from the bottom. I respect anybody who's had years of time in a thing, but like let's say using a particular software tool. Me personally, I always want to try using the next tool that comes out and try to make sense out of it and see how it fits in and not get sort of stuck in one place.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think I'm the same way too. And the older I've got, the more I've just kind of made peace with the fact that really what I like is to feel like I'm good at my craft, like I'm a craftsman. And that word artist, every once in a while I'll do something where I'm like, I think that may be my version of art, but like I don't really like it. Doesn't resonate with me the way I look at someone like Ariel Costa, or Sarah Beth, who teaches our illustration class. I mean, these are artists, right?
Yeah.
And I recognize that like there's a level of skill and probably intensity of practice that they've put in that I just haven't. And I'm more of a generalist, and I've kind of made peace with that. And I feel like as a marketer, that can be a really useful lens to look at things through, because you're always going to have the top of the top. Those people really are artisans. And then you've got people at the beginning who are like new and learning everything, but then in the middle, this giant amount of like potential customers and clients, if you're an artist, that really like they need good craft. And that's kind of how you should talk to them maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also helpful from the other end as an artist to recognize what is it you bring to the table when everyone else can do a lot of what you do. Right? Mm-hmm. We talked about attitude and wanting to be there for the right reasons. I mean, I found that my enthusiasm for what I was working on, and the fact that I was also careful, by the way, when I would create After Effects projects, to make it so that if I had to leave on another freelance project, that somebody else could take over, keeping things neat, keeping things so that other people could work on it. I found that brought me back more and more. Other people I found were trying to make things harder for people to work on, so they'd have to be called back, which would maybe work just once, right? Like they'd be like, I don't want to work with this guy anymore. We have to have him back because he's got to fix this. But the idea of being a team player and just really coming and bringing 100% is so important. When listen, you need talent, but it's not going to be the end all. I just keep talking about that. It's just talent gets you only so far. But the truth is, I would rather work with somebody who I have to pull a little forward to get them to make their work a little bit better than trying to work with somebody who's really talented, but just like I can't get them to do what I'm asking them to do. It's funny. We go through this at School of Motion. We have this amazingly talented guy, Frank. And, Frank, I feel bad for Frank because whereas we make thumbnails for our stuff, it's like, Frank, you just have to let go of your integrity. We have to make thumbnails that people click on.
This is YouTube, buddy.
Right. It's like YouTube. Like he's great. He's awesome. He's never like I I'm always worried. Am I pissing him off by making him making him slum it a little bit? But he's great. But I always feel like, there's like you have this training that tells you have to be the best artist and do the best work. But the truth is there's a level of functionality that comes first. And that fight of form versus function, I find that some of these higher end studios, like that's not a problem for them. Their clients are people who want form more than function necessarily. But most places want form and function. Like they want form. Sorry, most places want function. They want they want to have like something beautiful, but not at the expense of that message. So that mid range is where that happens, and that's where that's what makes sense to me. The rest of it is hard for me to understand.
Yeah, exactly. So just to wrap up, I guess your time at Red Giant and sort of the years after that. So you were at Red Giant when they were acquired by Maxon, and I think most people listening to this, myself included, have never been through something like that. And so I'm wondering what you learned from that about just sort of like maybe the scale of this industry and the companies in it. And I'm just curious what it's kind of like going through something like that, where you've been at this company for years, you've helped build it and build the culture of it. And then this much bigger company comes along and kind of absorbs it and then puts a ton of firepower behind it too.
Yeah. So, it's really interesting because Red Giant was a privately held lifestyle company and definitely one of the best gigs I've ever had. 12 years of just like sort of being able to figure ourselves out and try things and all of that. It was awesome. Maxon, when they acquired us, I gotta say, culturally, the people that were there, if you know the people like Matthias and all the other guys who were there, right, and Paul Babb and all of that, like these are people we get along with in the industry. But I think you don't realize that the impact of having a company that's publicly traded is going to change the nature of that business, especially in fairness. The acquisition came right before COVID when suddenly, revenue became you want to keep people employed, right? That's the thing is like suddenly you have this other company and you've got a lot of people and they're depending on you. The company has to shift its priorities. But the challenge is that like, then it kind of changes the culture of who you are. And that was personally for me hard, not because I think it's the wrong way to do things. It's, I really liked having that freedom of finding myself and kind of finding these places. But what was great was that, there was, like you say, a lot of resources. So if we needed to get things done, it wasn't like, how are we going to do this? It was like, what's the best way to get it done? And I also got to work with Paul Babb for a year. Paul and I are, like I've known him for so long and he's a great guy. Like having that person, having somebody who sees things the same way you do, even if necessarily the company can't keep to those same ideals, having partners that do see that things the same way as you makes that easier. But I think that anyone should know that, like, if you're ever looking at an acquisition, it's not easy. It's hard work. It takes a lot of time. I was in leadership at Red Giant, so that takes a lot of energy and just dealing with the mundanity of like, how are we going to do this now that we're changing, like, and getting on from not on Slack anymore. Now we're on Team, whatever, not Team, what was it? Right. It was like Microsoft Teams, right? Like everything can change and that can be pretty draining. Not for any bad reason outside of the fact that change is just hard. Change can be hard.
Yeah, especially at scale. I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, we went from being, like I said, 45 people to something like 250 people, and that was a big change. And also, we went from having people who were mostly either in the United States and Canada to like half the company being in another country in Germany, right? Like far away. That's really different time zones, and and trying to just work with them. And some people, like, English wasn't even their first even second language. So, it was good. Like, obviously being able to send emails and translate them, but having meetings was harder, good people. But like, again, like we couldn't sometimes communicate as well as I would have liked. And that was also hard for me because I'm such a talker, like I'm a New Yorker. I like to talk,
Yeah. You like to have some coffee and talk.
Coffee and talk. Yeah.
I got you. Well, so I don't know how much you'll actually be able to answer this, but I have to ask you. So, you were there, you said, I think 250 people around the time you left. I've heard through the grapevine, it's much more than that now. The company's been growing really fast. And, I'm looking at it. I've never been inside Maxon, but from the outside, I'm looking at these acquisitions they're making, Red Giant and ZBrush, which is a huge acquisition, Redshift, obviously. And I'm trying to read the tea leaves. What's the overall strategy here? And I'm curious, you've been out of Maxon for a little bit now. Do you have any theories as to sort of what the master plan is? Like, are they trying to become sort of an all-in-one creative company with all these tools, kind of like Adobe is? Before you hear that answer, I want to make sure you know about our in-depth motion design curriculum at School of Motion. We don't just offer classes that you can take anytime. We also offer interactive, guided sessions that go deep into teaching you how to use design and animation software, but more importantly, the principles of good design, animation, illustration, 3D, and much more. You get to learn alongside other artists, and you even get feedback and support from your own personal teaching assistant, a professional motion designer who's part of the School of Motion community. Find out more on our site. The link is in the description.
I mean, if you look, this is without knowledge of what's going on in there. But if you look at it from the outside, just speculating, right? Yeah. If you look at what the companies that they're acquiring, I mean, Red Giant was a weird acquisition. If you think about it, it's a plugin company that makes plugins for not their main product, right? Right. Like, that's pretty strange. ZBrush makes a ton more sense because that's the things we use. And Redshift obviously makes a huge amount of sense. But like, I'm looking at it and I look at all the things that they're doing, and now they have this new thing they just released with their capsules for video. Clearly, they think that media entertainment is a big place to be, and that they want to be in there. And I think if you look at, this is where it gets a little more financial, but if you look at the company that owns them, which is Nemetschek, right? I think that Maxon as a company is like one of their best performing companies, because media entertainment is a big thing. Like, and I don't know if it's what it is that makes media entertainment so much better, but the people there are certainly having more fun than I think the people who are working in the architecture space, Sure. So like, it's a happy company where people are just making a lot of cool stuff, and the media entertainment industry is consistently growing. So there's that. And also the fact that the people who are using these tools are also like expanding, right? Like, the 3D isn't just used by people like you and me. It's used by architects. It's used in medicine, right? There's people. I once sat next to I was on jury duty, and I sat next to a physicist who was like, "Oh yeah, I'm using 3D in my presentations, and they're really good." And in fact, I think it was at IBM. He said my supervisor came in and asked if I would stop making them this good with 3D because it looks like I'm not doing work if I'm making really great presentations.
That's awesome. Yeah, he's watching some of your tutorials. What do you think about? I got to ask you about Blender now. I mean, because that's kind of that's been a conversation, I think, at least for the past 2 to 3 years with Cinema 4D artists, where it's like, wow, Blender keeps getting better and there's really cool stuff. And, and it's free. It's like EJ's favorite joke. He beats the hell out of that dead horse. Like, did you know it's free? So you get this free 3D app, and it keeps becoming more and more capable. And, there's this like whole ecosystem built around it. And then you got Cinema 4D, which is a subscription that's pretty darn affordable. I think that it's priced very fairly for what you get, but it's expensive. And it's this private company. And so it would seem on the surface like, well, eventually Blender is just going to win, right? But in reality, I don't think the numbers are telling that story. I don't think that's actually happening, at least not in our industry, and at least not as fast as people thought it might. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, it always comes down to this: is that like when I'm here on a Saturday night working to get something done on a deadline, and something stops working, is if I pick up the phone, is there going to be somebody there to answer that call? With Blender, there's not. That doesn't mean it's not taken over, because people are using it more and more. I'm starting to see a lot more people using it, but it's still not going to be the main tool of choice at any big production, because it's just too dangerous, right? I actually think that it's interesting that Unreal charging for the use of it now makes it actually more attractive to studios, because if you're paying for it, then that means that they have to service you as a customer, whereas if you're using it for free, not, right? So Unreal is a product that you're going to start seeing more and more of in our space, because it's a real product backed by a real company that has a phone number, and people and support, and also forums and just all sorts of users that are out there who know a lot. I mean, not that Blender doesn't. It's just that, again, there's nobody at the end of the day. Someone's like, it's not my job. I'm not my responsibility to solve your problem, right? So.
Yeah. Well, I wonder too, and I don't know how much you've dug into the world of Blender, but I mean, to me, the theory I have is that adoption of software, it's also driven a lot by, it's not just the software itself, it's the entire ecosystem, right? It's like the community around it. How open is it? How much are you going to get like eggs thrown at you if you ask a stupid question on a forum, all that kind of stuff. And Blender, I've barely used it. I've just kind of dabbled, but like from what I can tell, it's a much younger audience and they're used to things being free, right? Because Blender is free. And so when you look at Blender courses, they're like $20 and $30 and stuff like that. And they're made by people who haven't actually done this professionally a lot of times. And so there's kind of just this more DIY kind of ethos to it, whereas Cinema 4D is now seen as a professional tool.
Yeah.
And even though the reality is they can probably both do the same things now, like one way or another, you can get the exact same result, but I don't know, there's just like this human element to it. And I'm curious, like you've worked at software companies, how much does that play into like purchasing decision and the decision to pick one tool over the other?
If you went on the loudness of people, then all those tools should be, like if you make a plugin for one of those tools, you should be making a ton of money based on how loud people demand that you make. Like I remember Sony Vegas, right, which was not a very inexpensive editing system, was a low end. And now it's not owned by Sony anymore, but Sony Vegas, and the people screaming at us to make Magic Bullet in it, like work inside of it. And finally they did it. And like, we have the actual, I remember we had like, we could see who was using this stuff, what host application they were opening it in. Nobody was opening it up in Sony Vegas. Like a few people, like bought it and then that was it. Like, so it was just loudness, right? I don't know, it's hard to know, like, again, this is a generation of people who like you say, are used to having things for free, but when it comes to start making money, there's this fear that if I use something that's free and doesn't come with any kind of backing, like, what am I going to do? Right. So it's not the users that are maybe the challenge there. It's the people who are paying the artists to work. They would want them to be working in something that they know, like that the studio can rely on, and I know that Maxon has literally sent a guy on a plane when there was a problem at a big studio. They put a guy on a plane and sent him out there to solve that problem. So that's not something Blender is going to do. Yeah.
One more question on this, because you just made me think of this, which is there's this tool for After Effects that I love. We have you taught classes on it. It's called Duik, right? And for a while, it was the character rigging tool for After Effects, and it's absurdly powerful. It's probably too powerful. It has too many features, in my opinion, but it can do a million things, right? And it's very good for character rigging. And it's totally free, right? The guy who, his name's Nicolas Dufresne, I think, and he's this French guy, and he makes it, and his ethos, it's very altruistic. It's like, I don't want people to have to pay for this. I want people to make cool stuff with it. That's awesome. That's great. And I remember when I started building School of Motion and learning about business, one of the things that kind of struck me was sometimes it feels good to give something away for free, but it's the worst thing you could do. Because now you're basically guaranteeing that you're going to burn out on it at some point and have zero incentive to keep supporting it and to keep making it better. And you're not going to be able to pay other people to help you. And so basically you're doing the world a disservice by not charging for this thing. And I've always felt that about Duik. I really think he should charge for it. And lo and behold, from what I can tell, I don't have any numbers to back this up, but I don't hear much about it anymore. I hear about Rubber Hose. I hear about Limber. I hear about these other tools that you have to pay for that don't have 1/10 of the features that Duik does, but everyone uses those now, and you're making me think maybe that's why. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, I don't know. Again, it comes down to, like you say, like there's this thing where you lose the motivation to continue to update stuff. Although it seems like Duik is continuing to be updated. I mean, I think we just had a tutorial on it here at School of Motion, and there's new features in it, and it's really great. But like say, like in a professional setting, people worry, right? Like that's the thing, is like, what if it doesn't work? What do I do? I think less so maybe for like a plugin here and there in After Effects, because it's not your host application. It's not like After Effects is free. But look, from the perspective of it's great about the world. You're not doing the world a favor. You're not doing yourself a favor in that if you want to be able to be excited about doing this, sure, giving away for free is great, but it's not, like you say, it's not sustainable, right? It isn't sustainable. And also, and that means that this vision, this thing that you have that you love, is going to die because you can't keep up with it, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, I remember just before ZBrush was acquired, I spoke to the owner, and that was like something he mentioned to me. Like, I want to make sure that like for me, it's so important that the software continue to be developed. And I was like, that is not like Maxon is like this. Like, one thing's for sure, like they are going to continue to develop software. Like, if you're being acquired, that's not like, there are some companies that acquire companies to crush them, right, and make that software go far away. But Maxon doesn't do that, right? They wanted to advance ZBrush. And I think, it was hard for people who use ZBrush because they had only bought, a lot of them bought once, right? Like 15 years ago for chump change.
Yeah.
And like every update was free. But if, I don't have an insight into their business, but I can't imagine that their business was sustainable much longer, given the way the economy is and everything, that like giving away stuff for free, that much stuff for free with barely only like relying on new customers to support it. Like that's going to kill your business. Right. So I think having stuff that you charge for even a little bit is important because it helps pay the bills, keep the lights on while you're doing something you love. You don't have to make a ton of money at it, but you got to pay those bills or the thing's going to die.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start talking about the future here, or at least the near future. So there's probably like, I don't know, 3 or 4 things that come up like every week at School of Motion. I talk about Rive. We talk about AI a bunch. And then you are obsessed with Unreal Engine, and you've been like spending a lot of time kind of learning that. I know you actually took our Unreal Engine class, and that's kind of how you started learning it. So maybe just talk a little bit about like why that's your new current kind of, that you said you always like to have a new thing you're learning. Why is it that right now?
Well, let me jump back just slightly to another project because it kind of leads into this. So I worked on this thing called Star Wars: The Woodcut. I wanted to learn Redshift, and I wanted to learn Pyro in Cinema 4D. And I spent basically 6 weeks every night, and over the holiday break, Christmas to New Year's, my wife was like, "When are you going to get off the computer?" Like, I was so focused on doing this. I mean, I think we all have like a spouse anyone who's watching this probably has a spouse who's like, "When are you coming to bed?" Right? Like, that's a common refrain. Yeah. But I wanted to learn these tools because I wanted to make my stuff look better. I knew that I could get things to look better if I could master some of this stuff. And I created this project called Star Wars: The Woodcut, which was like Star Wars as seen if it were like little woodcut stop motion animation. And working on that, a lot of things happened. First of all, ILM reached out to say it was awesome, and Mark Hamill reached out to say it was awesome, which is like that's insane. After that, I don't really care if people.
Yeah,
watch
dude,
it.
you could just quit. I mean, you peaked.
Right? I peaked right there.
Yeah.
But what happened was that I made something that was, I thought, like probably one of the best things I've ever made. And actually, like, I feel like for the art, for the style, like I was trying something new artistically as well. And it really was great. But the time it took to render some of this stuff, like one of the shots took 25 hours to render 4 seconds. And if I made a mistake, which I did, I had to like, oh, well, there's the weekend. Let's just let it go. And then I can come back to this project again. Right. So what actually took a lot of time in that 6 weeks was, I'm a great animator. I think as an animator, I'm pretty good at least, but the getting quality renders and lighting and all of that, that's a challenge for me. So that's why I spent my time doing that. Man, the render times killed me. And I started hearing about this thing called Unreal. And, I knew about it from video games, but I heard that they're starting to make it more usable for people who are doing animation, like in more of like a cinematic way. And I started, okay, let me go watch some tutorials. And I started watching and I'm like, nope. Every one of these tutorials is for like video game designers. And like, even if they're like, oh, just watch this. Even if you're an animator, like this will help you. I'm like, no, it's not. It's absolutely, it's like, I don't need to know 90% of what you're teaching me. And it was really frustrating. And then I saw that Jonathan Winbush had made a series or training program here at School of Motion. And I took it. And within 4 hours, I knew, like, again, keeping in mind, I've got 25 years as a 3D artist and all that. So it was really just translating what I knew. But that's what this course was. It was Unreal for 3D artists. It wasn't like Unreal for somebody who's never touched 3D before, right? It was like if you've had any exposure to 3D, you probably know what the potential is, but you don't know how to do it in Unreal. So I'm going to show you how to do all these things. And even as a beginner, you can get a lot out of that course. But I think that with my history and my knowledge, like it was just like, oh, that's where that button is. Oh, that's how you do it. And things were hard to do. It was a very different way of thinking because the way that Unreal is designed is for video games. And that means that like everything that you use has to be encapsulated in this project. So your projects, they can bloat very quickly, get big because you can't like be referencing files that are sitting on an external hard drive. It has to be imported into the project file. So it was hard to sort of think that way and think about some of these things differently. But once I did that and I'd make a mistake and be like, oh, I need to fix this. I'm like, oh, crap. And I'm like, oh, wait, no, that's not going to take me 10 hours to render. That's going to take me 5 minutes. And I was like, holy crap. Like, sure, I would say that the getting to the place where it was animation-wise is a lot harder than it was in Cinema 4D. But once I'm there, like the rest of it, every time I have to do little tweaks and things like that, which is where I found so much of my bulk of my time was being used in Cinema 4D. It's like, oh, I could just quickly make a change. And this morning, in fact, I re-rendered 3 scenes in like 10 minutes that I'm working on that would have in Cinema 4D would have been like easily like 3 days, you know?
Yeah.
It's just, it's incredible to me. And I think that for me, being able to get stuff out at this kind of speed, and also it's kind of like, now that they're also especially working their stuff into motion graphics, they have these new Mograph tools that are really awesome. Maybe seem a little familiar if you've used Cinema 4D Mograph, you know.
Yeah.
But it's possible, but faster, and that's always for me a big thing. I remember one holiday season, my wife asked me what I wanted as a gift, and I was like, it was Amazon Prime had just come out, and I said, I want Amazon Prime. She goes, well, what do you want from Amazon? I'm like, no, I want Amazon Prime. I don't want to wait for my packages to show up anymore. So like for me, the gift time, it's like TSA pre or clear or any of those things. Like time is valuable, and so I don't want to wait for things to be made. I just want to have them as fast as I can. And Unreal gives me that instant feedback. It's like being a little bit of a junkie. I'll be honest with you. It's like that hit right now.
That's so funny. So let me ask you about the Star Wars thing, because, you know, I remember like back before School of Motion, I was running a studio, and I actually used Cinema 4D every day, and I was using V-Ray for a lot of projects. And I remember having to, you know, we had a little render farm. I think we had like 5 or 6 machines locally we would use, because this was kind of before cloud rendering was really popular. You know, and I had to manage that, right? V-Ray was pretty slow back then. There was no real-time V-Ray like on Cinema 4D. And, you know, then along comes Octane and Redshift. And I thought the promise of those things was you're not supposed to have to wait, you know, 25 hours for a 4-second shot. So how come the rendering is happening much faster, but it still seems like, is it just that 3D artists tend to push things to, you know, is it?
Oh, I was pushing things. I mean, I had a ton of geometry, lots of pyro going on there. So there was like 5 or 6 different fires, plus a ship would explode and that would break up into parts and stuff like that. That particular shot was really was complex, and it definitely pushed Cinema 4D. At the time, I had Pinnacle, I had a 3090 card. That was the highest you could have. I had a really great new computer from Puget Systems, which is like the best computer I've ever had. Yeah. And even now, it's 3 years later and it's still singing. But at the time, like I was just pushing it as hard as I could. And I don't even know if I knew that I was new to Redshift. So I didn't know about the promise of speed. I just knew about the promise of quality rendering. And it's funny because I worked at Maxon and never used Redshift because it was only available. It wasn't available I think at the time I was on a Mac and it wasn't available on a Mac. And then I switched over to PC after I left and I got it. So now Redshift is available on both, but it wasn't originally. So I never touched it while I was there. And I gotta say, there's like, I love Unreal, but you can't get the quality that you can get out of Redshift. There's things like, different kinds of caustics and chromatic aberration. And, like there's just certain like lighting and things like that you just can't get out of Unreal. But again, when we start talking about sports graphics and where that is versus some of that higher end, like buck stuff, like now we're talking about a product that totally lends itself to a field that is not at the highest end, but that is like the big chunk of that triangle we talked about. That's where it's aiming. And that's why, again, like when I said, you asked me where I would want to fall into, I want to fall into that mid zone of that triangle because that's the work I love doing. And I love being able to get things quickly. And this is the first time I feel like that's possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, so, we were both at NAB this year and we saw a presentation about the new motion design tools for Unreal, and watching it and seeing the speed of it, and not just the speed, but also Unreal is an extraordinarily deep program. Like it seems like you can attach code to almost any piece of it and have it really react and kind of auto, like make new proportions and all this kind of stuff. It could like the type can react to how much type is in it. And I'm thinking about, I had a conversation with an artist, Marcos Voss, recently, who was the creative director on the Super Bowl package for Too Fresh, and they used Unreal Engine. And, I was just thinking about how, like that kind of work typically is done with After Effects scripts that are like these custom kind of toolkits that get made and stuff like that. There's this whole sort of ecosystem built around that. And that's how most of that stuff is done, or it's just pre-rendered 3D, or it's using VizRT and these like other super high-end expensive tools. And Unreal right now seems to have the capability to just do all of that better, faster, cheaper, check, 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 right? And so logically you think, oh, well then tomorrow it should take over the world and everyone should start using it. But you and I have been around long enough to know that that's not what will happen. So I'm curious, what do you think it will actually take? Like, are there things that Unreal needs to change or they're not doing right yet? Or is it just going to take 20 years?
Well, let's talk about, like, I think, you know, you talked about some of the other tools that are out there, right? That like what makes people change is a great question. And I think about the fact that there's Cavalry, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's, what's the other one that came out that's like an After Effects competitor? The problem is the key is the ecosystem, right? And you can have a great product, right? That rivals After Effects in terms of speed and getting things done. But think about how much people have invested in After Effects and also the plugins and all of the third-party stuff that's out there. That has probably what has kept them at the front of this. Like people, I mean, then again, there's really no competition for After Effects in one product right now. So that's also a big part of it. And I think that what it takes to make that change, to get people to make that change, is something has to change so strongly that it becomes like, it's worth it, right? I do actually think that Unreal might be it. Like, there's all these other tools that came out for After Effects and Cinema 4D that compete with it, but Unreal, there's a company with money behind it, number one, right? They have a strong ecosystem. There's tons. You go to the Unreal marketplace, there's tons of assets and plugins and all this great stuff. But also, and this is really the key, is that speed is going to be the thing, right? So when I think about sports graphics, ultimately turnaround time on projects like that, you don't have like this 6 weeks to build a big branding project. It's like a team wins and suddenly they're in the series. Now you have to turn around a bunch of graphics. You didn't know which team it was going to be until they won, right? Now you've got like a couple of days to get this thing going. You know, so like this is where speed becomes the thing that brings people over. Now it's going to be hard, I think, at first, but as more people see other people doing it and realizing how fast it is, that is going to change. That is going to change things. That's why I have faith. I have faith in Unreal, because if I have to look at what keeps me from ever moving over, it's the ease of use of that transition, but also like, what do I really get out of it in the end? Like, do I get something out of it? And a little extra thing here and there isn't the thing that's going to do it, but speed and time, man, that is so important in the world that fits in that triangle that's in that center area. It's so critical to getting things done. And especially now that, like, one of the things that you mentioned about Unreal having all these motion graphics tools are, they have stuff that, like, it's like you code it, you can use like, like Excel spreadsheets and stuff like that to get in information about different players and stuff. And then that thing can just bring it up quickly and almost in real time and render out a thing on them. So like, you don't even have to like sit and set it up inside. A lot of that stuff can be not coded exactly, but you could tell it to like, look at this document and pull each one of these names up and render out a lower third for that thing. So it's just so fast.
Another thing I'll point out too, I had a conversation, I think last year, with a producer at We Are Royale, which is the awesome studio out in LA. And she was telling me that they were doing a project. I think it was like a package for some big video game, like esports competition thing, right? This giant package at an arena, and it was going to be on TV and stuff. And it was all being done in Unreal Engine so that they could also use it live at the event. And she said the biggest issue they had was they can't find artists who know how to use Unreal that way. There's plenty of people who know Unreal, but they come from the world of gaming. They don't come from this broadcast sort of motion design world. And so that's also key, like, you know, making adoption hard, is just companies are not willing to invest in that until they know that there's artists that they can hire. It's kind of this chicken and an egg situation, which I think, you know, it's probably a good opportunity for companies like School of Motion to kind of step in and sort of be the bridge there.
As an artist too, the tool is free. It's not like you have to even buy it. For just learning it. Like, and as long as you're not making, what is it, $100,000, I think is their line, or is it $1 million?
It's $1 million for games, right. I think. Yeah.
Right. And I think they're going to be doing that for production and what we do too. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a free tool that you can pick up and learn in a couple of hours if you have the right teacher. I did. John Winbush is amazing. Mm-hmm. And then you'll be ready to go. Like, again, sure, you have to spend a lot of time in it to get better and better at it, but you'll want to also. I mean, I don't know about you, but I love, once I get into a tool like that, like, I know that Rive for you has been like a thing you kind of dive down. Like, once you have fun with it, you're like, I can't believe I can do this. This is so awesome. And, you know, for me, like, as coming from keeping in mind, like, motion design, sure, but also filmmaking and visual effects. Like, I'm making stuff in Unreal right now that is like so much fun and so cool that I could never have done in any other program, right? Just because like the scope of the environments, the world, like, and it runs without my computer dying is like, and it practically real time for some of this stuff when it should by anything I understand about animation, visual effects, and the technology behind it, that should not happen. But like it is, and it's incredible to get that feedback right away. And sure, when I want to render in final quality, it has to like do like multiple frames to blend them just to get them really smooth. But I can see in real time these visions that I have and have them come back to me right away. And, you know, I think that artists should be looking at these tools just because, look, we're all feeling threatened maybe a little bit by things like AI. But right now, like, yes, maybe in a couple of years, right now, in this moment in time, that's not the thing. Like, the thing is whether or not there's going to be people who can use some of these more democratized free tools that are just faster. But because you're stuck in a place where, like, I've been using Cinema 4D and this is what makes sense to me, it's not that you should stop using Cinema 4D. It's that you should recognize that there's an additional product out there that can get you work and that would be not hard for you to learn and to grow in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up AI because that's the last thing I wanted to ask you about. And I think this is a sort of great way to talk about it because you're basically pointing out with Unreal that it's a tool that makes it much easier and faster for you to get from the vision that's in your mind that only you see to something other people can see that approximates that vision, right? That's what art is, right? It's you see something no one else does. I want you to see it too. I'm going to make something to try and make you see it. And one argument for AI is that that's just another tool that does that, right? Like now, instead of having like Unreal is much faster to do this, but it's still a very complicated technical thing, right? AI, if I can type really well and I write this really long prompt, I might get something that's 20% close to what I actually had in my head, right? So how do you think of AI? Do you hate it? Do you have a pitchfork ready? Or do you see it as maybe it's a practical, useful thing? Just talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, you know, we live in a society of extremes, especially if you're on social media and you hear about like, there's a lot of anger. And I think, look, the issue for me when it comes to AI is only about whether or not you're stealing from other artists, right? Outside of that, I think AI is a very powerful tool. I also don't believe any of the hype. You and I both know we've tried to use a lot of these tools that the end result is always like, it kind of got me what I wanted, but if I had to make a change, how am I going to do that? And, you know, it's like, it's close and like 90% of what comes out of it is not what I wanted. Right. So, you know, I think that again, my understanding is like studios might be using it to do things like sort of like they want to pitch an idea or something like that. But I think the one time I saw it used, and I was not upset that they used it for the same reason everyone else is upset, but on that Nick Fury series on Disney Plus, that they had the opening that was made with AI. Oh, right. I just thought it was like butt ugly. I was like, I don't need to be mean to people who make it like that. Was like, it looked, AI is weird. At least at the time, video AI was weird, and it did not look to me good. I think it was a gimmick, and people are angry like you're using AI. It's like taking from art. I was like, that's just not like that's not a good opening for a series that doesn't tell me anything about the series. Does not make that series look better to me. You know, I think that AI, like I worked with a company called Wonder Dynamics, and I think that those tools that use AI to it would remove the actor from the scene, but then replace it with 3D character. I really think that stuff is cool. I'm using depends on how you say it, Cascader or Cascadar, right?
I say Cascader, but yeah, Cascadeur, yeah,
Cascadeur. You know, it's actually really cool. Like it helped me. I had some motion capture that I felt was a little stiff, and I brought it into that program, and it helped add in some physics and stuff like that wasn't there. And I was like, you know, I still was making the stuff, but this just helped me clean it up a little bit. And I think things like rotoscoping and you know, motion capture. These are things where AI can really help and be just like such a boon to artists. And then I saw like Houdini just released these incredible updates to Houdini, right? They have this reel that they put out, and it's got like mind-blowing stuff. And then there's this little section which is, we've added AI. And it's just like, how do you take everything that we've just made look beautiful and just make it look really ugly, right? Like with unstable video, it's like really weird that they're doing that when I think that like, this is where I think Maxon, for example, like I applaud them not having AI, not because that they shouldn't be thinking about it, because right now they don't know what to do with it is my guess. And because there's not really a great answer for what to do with it there. And it's just going to be like, it's going to be a gimmick that's going to make people angry in the end, right? Giving them something that doesn't really give them any value in it. So I think that, you know, AI is a buzzword, and it's like a couple of years ago. Do you remember when you're going to NAB and everything was VR and 3D TVs and all this stuff? And it was like, I remember I had a conversation with the person who's head of video at Adobe at the time. And I said, I noticed you guys put in all these VR tools into After Effects. And he's like, yeah, we're just doing it for the people because it's what they want. And that's what they're saying they want. But in a year from now, that's not going to be the tool. And sure enough, like, it's gone, right? Because, when I come home after a hard day of work, I want to slip into a comfortable pair of 3D goggles. That's what
Yeah,
right?
definitely not.
But this is the interesting thing is like, so when I see that, I think about the fact that like, there's always these things each year that come out at NAB or any of these conferences that they talk about and then disappear. It's not happening with AI, and it's not going to happen with AI. Now, the hype may die down, right? The hype, which is like seeing like Photoshop is dead or, 3D animation is dead. Like, come on, that's not true. Correct. But I do think that this stuff is going to be useful and is even already to me, like I said, like using Cascade art is really helpful. And I think that I look forward to the day where no one has to rotoscope anymore. I know that's going to kill an industry that gets farmed out to a lot of the time other countries. But it's not the artistic work. That's the thing is for me, it's like when someone says, I'm making art because I made AI, like that's where you hit on something. You said 20% of what I wanted, right?
Yeah.
But what I like about 3D and tools like Unreal is that like I have a vision and I get it out there. Maybe it's not 100%, maybe it's 80%, but it's my vision. Whereas when I type in something into AI and it gives me something, I don't know that like I get anything that looks exactly like I had in mind or even close to it. It's like, oh, that kind of does have the same idea. It's just not what I was asking for necessarily. And that to me is like, that's not, I mean, it's creating something. Is it creating art? I don't know. I'm not going to get mad about it. I'm just going to say that it's not what I want to do. And I think it's not what most companies who are hiring people to make things for television or commercials, they don't want something that gives them 20% of what they want. And then they say, change it. You're like, I can't, but on the other hand, I know a movie producer, guy who makes real films, like legitimate $100 million movies, who's like, he wants to be the first person to make like a film that's driven by AI. But he comes to me, he's like, is it ready? I'm like, nope, it's not ready. Like every time he comes back to me every couple of weeks, we look at something new that came out. Like, last week, that stuff came out and I was like, it's good, but look at the fingers, look at it's not stable. Or, like try to get the people to actually say real words. It's not going to be the thing. So, but I think that Hollywood wants it to be the thing because it's going to be cheaper, but it's not happening yet.
I mean, right now it's not even cheaper. I mean, apparently, I've been reading articles about sort of what it costs to actually like generate, and have enough GPUs and all that. I mean, it's astronomically expensive. I've been trying to sort of triangulate for the past couple years, really, about like what do I think about all this, and I think where I am now is that, when you're doing anything professionally, there's a bar you have to cross or it's not good enough, and that's probably like it's got to be 95% good enough, right? And then the client won't notice the rest of it. But it can't be 92% good enough. That's not going to cut it, right? And it certainly can't be 50% good enough. And the problem with AI, and frankly, the current generation of everything AI, the way it works is it's probabilistic. Right? It's not like you're rolling the dice and you get the same roll every time. It's like completely different every time. And so that's a big problem, right? You can't actually get it all the way over the finish line without a ton of manual fix-up work. And at that point, sometimes it's faster to just make it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, I mean, I think about every meeting I've ever had with a client, right? Yeah. Like every time I turned in work and they like, can you make this change? Like there's that famous poster, make it red, make it blue, make it a pony, right? Change it completely, right? Like the thing is that anyone who's ever sat with a client or a big customer or anything like that knows that like this stuff won't work because they constantly want things to change, right?
Yeah.
But I do think this is something that, as the stuff that's come out in recent weeks, as video has gotten faster and better, I do think that companies that make stock footage like that is like, I think the most immediately threatened industry, because here's the thing. I can't really art direct stock footage anyway, right? Like I have to find a video. When I'm looking for stock footage, I'm not looking for something that's exactly what I want. I'm looking for something that conveys the idea close enough, right? And if you could get that with AI, then that's where the challenge is. You can like literally like you can say, I want anything. And sure, it may not have been the unicorn, is sitting in a pumpkin patch that you had in mind, but like, where else are you going to find a video of a unicorn in a pumpkin patch, right? Like, and then there's things like flyovers of cities and stuff. If it's good enough, it's good enough. So I do think that those companies have something to be worried about in the more immediate.
But I also think that like, but see, so this is kind of the point I'm trying to aim at here, and I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining it, but it's like, if you're doing creative work, it doesn't matter if it's for your own thing, for your Star Wars film, or if it's for a client for their thing, right? As the artist, you have a vision, And that vision is like this multi-threaded complex thing, and little tiny details throw it off, right? And AI sucks at little tiny details.
Yeah.
But then stock footage companies, that's not their business. Their business is making lumber for other people to use. And it turns out that the kind of work, social media ads and things like that, it doesn't matter if it's like a Michael Bay beautifully shot helicopter, swoop over the Brooklyn Bridge, or if it's an AI generated one that's 60% as good. It's going to be on a TikTok video. Who cares? This one I can have 10 variations for like $10. This one I have to license from Getty for $500.
Yeah.
I'm choosing this one. And so I think that the people selling the shovels that creative people use, they are more threatened by AI than actually the people using the shovels. And the people using the shovels, that's us. We're the bricklayers, if we're using some Christo terms.
Oh, yeah.
I think really we just have to look at this as we can move faster now. We can go more quickly from the vision here to something that sells that vision to other people. And I really am starting to almost, I'm not quite ready to say it yet, but I'm almost thinking like, I think you just have to start using AI tools if you're a creative person doing this professionally. I'm not sure there's an argument not to at this point if you like to have a long career. But I'm not saying that yet. I'm just sort of floating it. Yeah.
Look, it is fraught with copyright and trademark issues and things like that have to be gotten over. But they will. I'm sure that they will be gone over. And because like this again, it's not like something that the industry created to sell more products. That is what like 3D TVs were, and like and VR helmets and all that for filmmaking. Now, I think VR. I love VR. Play games in it, but like for filmmaking, it's not the thing. But AI is like, it's in everything now. And I really like, there's no coming back. We've let that, we've popped the can and
it's here.
Genie's out and all that stuff, it's there, and it's, people are using it for everything. It's so funny because my son's at school, and like the school was like, you can't use AI in your schoolwork because, that would simulate the real world a little too much, maybe. Right. I just think about that. Like that is, it's like, I remember when, listen, this before cell phones, like an iPhone, right? And this is thick and old, but like when I was in elementary school, teachers like, you can't use a calculator because you're never going to have one with you when you need it. And it's like, right. You're going to have to learn how to do that. It's like, hey Siri, what is, like that's how we do it. AI is here to stay, and it's going to solve a lot of problems. But it. Oh, look at it. Siri's actually talking to me.
See, that shows how smart AI is.
Oh my God. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But it's just, this is a tool like anything else. And I think you're right. Like the people selling the bricks are the ones who are most threatened. It's so interesting though, the way that the bricklayers feel so threatened. There's part of it that is like this whole thing about whether they're stealing their art or not. And I think about, I remember having software that was copied by another company at Red Giant. And the reaction I got from people when they were like, I was like, they copied our user interface. They copied our experience. And people were like, yeah, but good artists borrow and great artists steal, and that's totally fine. So it's an interesting thing for me to see that sort of philosophy of like, oh, it's bad when a machine does it. I think like there's a whole bunch of legal stuff and that has to be figured out. But there's been plenty of plagiarism in our industry, and it's always been like, well, artists copy other artists. That's what they do.
Yeah.
So it's whether like there is this argument about what's the line, and I am interested to see where that goes. I don't use too much AI like right now in my work, but I do use it for like the things that I talked about, like the character animation and helping that. And I use move.ai. I got a subscription just to do some motion capture, and I love it. It's like, I could not have done this before. Right. So the other thing about it is, and I think this is the key in some of these tools, is that people are worried about losing jobs. And I'm like, it's not that like suddenly this big studio I was going to use to get motion capture is losing money. I was never going to pay that studio to do that. Right.
That's it.
This tool just made it possible for me to do this thing. Now, again, when you start talking about things like having someone else's artwork show up in your thing, like there was this thing this week where there's like a character from Pixar, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
That's not okay. That's right.
That's not okay. That is definitely problematic.
Yes.
But it's not that the tool is stealing work from people for a lot of this stuff. It's that it's making it possible for me to do stuff I wouldn't have done before. I had these great stories in my head, or at least they're, in my mind, they're great. Right. And I want to tell them, and no ability to do it because the tools, I can't afford the tools to do that. Now I can. And that's actually a huge deal. But that was the same thing for subscription. People got mad about that, but I was paying thousands of dollars every time Adobe updated their software. And now it's and now it's
Yeah.
like cheap to just go month to month.
You
or
just
year to
budget
year.
it and there it is. I mean, we've been doing these Motion Mondays videos now for several weeks, and the reaction's been pretty universally positive. People really, really like them. I don't think we could do those without some of these AI tools. We're not a huge company where we could, I mean, if you think about the way producing, a 10 or 15 minute news style show like that every single week, how you would do that traditionally. I mean, you worked on Sesame Street. You probably saw how many writers and camera operators and editors and everything it takes. And now we literally do those in a day from start to finish, but we're using ChatGPT and we're using Descript and we're using the AI transcription tools in Premiere. And we're using ChatGPT to help with sort of finding highlights. I mean, all of the things that a human can do, but AI can just do it faster. And it unlocks a thing that literally your options are not pay humans to do it or use AI. It doesn't exist at all, or you use AI and it does. And that's
right.
And I think a lot of people kind of miss that when they get upset. I think the Maxon thumbnail thing from several months ago, that was an example of that for me, right?
Yeah. So, it's funny because I was thinking about the fact that we do these Motion Mondays, and what you've really done there is we could actually just work through the weekend, right? But we don't want to. Like we try to be at School Emotional Lifestyle Company where people have their weekends and their time for family. And those AI tools allow you to do what you wanted to do, but would have taken somebody has to work the weekends to edit that thing. Instead, you can get all the stuff written right away and done and recorded, and that's it. And then we hand it off. And before Friday is over, it's done and people get to go home and live life. And that actually is the promise of AI, is not having to spend that time. And that's what I love about it. I just, again, I don't think that when someone says I made art when they had an AI, did you make that? I mean,
right.
Then again, I was using Poser when I first started out in animation, and I'm I made this character, and I'm did I really make that character? But you know what? I worked in the software and I made it. So it's just, these are questions that are going to be answered over time. But I think you and I both know that AI, it's here to stay, and it's just finding exactly where it fits without it being a problem for people. But it's here. It's sticking around.
Thank you so much, Aharon, and thank you for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss any podcast episodes. We have some incredible guests coming up, and you definitely don't want to miss those. I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you.